If you've ever been told we've done all that we can, or that you need to lower your expectations, you'll know exactly how frustrating it feels when there's an unwillingness to support your child at that moment. Often the real issue lies in assumptions when your child is expected to learn and behave the same way, as those who don't fit the mould can be excluded, misunderstood or unfairly judged, and that creates barriers that make the classroom feel anything but inclusive. You might hear that everything is fine just because a child is coping, or that any child that doesn't fit the typical mould is seen as the problem. And this can wear down even the most patient amongst us. So in this video, I'll look at how these assumptions create barriers and how they hold children with different needs back. I'll walk through how to recognise the patterns so that we as parents can feel more confident and empowered when advocating for our children. My name is Brenda and I'm a parent mentor and a fellow parent. I support parents raising children with individual needs and differences to stay empowered whilst they navigate through procedural challenges. And it's definitely disheartening when there is the assumption that if coming into school works for the most, then any child that struggles with that must be at fault, rather than recognising the need for more understanding, flexibility or support. When the expectation is for every child to sit still, make eye contact and speak up in class without acknowledging that some children communicate and learn differently, it creates an environment where a child who doesn't fit the mould, they're not supported, they're misunderstood, excluded or even unfairly judged, where a child is expected to adapt no matter the cost. So today I've made a follow-on sequel to this video here about parent blaming, and I've taken comments from a podcast that I previously listened to. So let's take a closer look at some of the most common and disheartening assumptions that parents often encounter and the damage it can cause. And the first one is frustration at being asked to adjust for neurodivergent children. Comments such as, "It's like, here now, you deal with it." This reflects to a mindset where neurodivergent students are seen as a burden and their support needs extra work, rather than seeing inclusion as essential, and it's viewed as optional or worse, unfair. When this mindset exists, it builds friction instead of collaboration, making it harder for us as parents to get the understanding and flexibility our children require. And in these moments, despite feeling dismissed, staying empowered is crucial for making meaningful progress, as assumptions can lead to inadequate support, such as generic interventions that don't meet your child's needs. And that's why showing up and continuing to advocate helps to handle these setbacks and obstacles like these. And another disheartening response is when the inclusion of diverse learners is seen as a disruption. Comments such as, "Other kids in the class are losing out on their education because I have to babysit for your child." I've heard this one personally, and it definitely reflects a troubling mindset. When a teacher believes that a normal classroom only runs smoothly if every child learns and behaves in the same way, any child who needs something different is often seen as a disruption, rather than a signal that perhaps the SEN process would benefit a child by being more flexible and inclusive. And this one-size-fits-all approach leads to children with individual needs and differences being unfairly labelled, reinforcing harmful stereotypes and limiting their chances to grow and succeed. And as a parent, it's very hard not to feel frustrated when you see that your child is being misunderstood and judged. And that's why advocacy is so important in those moments, because it helps to challenge the assumptions and shifts the focus back to understanding and support. Another disheartening response is the belief that behaviour is purely willful and not disability related. Comments such as, "These kids with these bad behaviours have nothing to do with disability." This kind of statement denies the possibility that behaviour might be a form of communication, often rooted in neurodivergence, emotional stress or unmet needs. If it doesn't align with a teacher's expectations of how a typical student should behave, it creates a harmful barrier to understanding and support. And children with SEN have legal rights to reasonable adjustments and appropriate support under the Equalities Act 2010 and the Children's and Families Act. And when those rights are overlooked because of assumptions, children suffer, and advocacy becomes the key to making sure those protections are upheld. Another deeply disheartening response from an educator is expecting families to follow traditional roles. Comments such as, "Parents are checked out, they just leave it all to us." This assumes that there's no one right way for families to engage, and if they don't show up in the exact way, they're not involved. But many of us are advocating behind the scenes. We're emailing, documenting, attending appointments, constantly working to support our children. And just because the work isn't always visible, it doesn't mean that it's not happening. Therefore, expecting passive compliance from parents reflects a deeper issue. And finally, the last disheartening response that I'm going to talk about today is a resistance to change. Communication such as, I'm not a psychologist or a social worker, it's not my job to deal with this. This reveals a resistance to the evolving role of educators in an inclusive world. Supporting neurodivergent students doesn't mean taking on another profession. It means embracing collaboration, flexibility and trauma-informed processes. And by advocating against outdated and rigid educational mindsets, we're not just advocating for our children, we're helping to create a better culture for all learners. And there are times on this journey where it can feel overwhelming and you start to question, why does advocating even matter? These assumptions aren't just frustrating, they're damaging. As they prevent access to appropriate support, it reinforces harmful stereotypes, it undermines collaboration between families and schools, and it creates rigid systems that punish difference instead of celebrating it. And worst of all, they quietly enforced enablism in ways that go unchecked. So what can we do as parents? Well, we definitely don't want to be part of the problem. We speak up even when it's hard. We push for adjustments tailored for our children and not just generic tick box interventions. We challenge outdated mindsets with knowledge, not just emotion, and remind those who have a duty of care of their responsibilities. Like many challenges rooted in bias, the issue often isn't about what can be done. It's about whether others are willing to set aside their assumptions and truly listen. And this kind of thinking is harmful because it creates real barriers to education for children with individual needs and differences, or those receiving SEN support. It fosters inflexibility and resistance to inclusive teaching practices, and it shifts blame onto students and families who just don't fit the mould, which stifles growth and innovation. So if this video resonates with you, I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments. What stood out for you? What would you like to hear about next? And if you're navigating SEN challenges and you feel that you may need some guidance, why not check out this playlist? But for now, keep doing what you're doing, stay focused, stay empowered, and keep creating progress. Thank you for listening.